and get started. So I was thinking, last week we talked a lot about the source sheet last week took us in a lot of different directions, which was great. But I thought now to sort of narrow it down, today we would talk more specifically about the role of money in these broader questions of power. And then next week and the week after, get into more specifically Jewish. I mean, all of it's very Jewish, but like the role of American Jews in American politics, and especially Reform Jews, the creation of the Religious Action Center, that kind of stuff. More of the historical things. And then the final class, when we meet in person, as we suggested previously, for a final class to just have some coffee or tea and talk about the whole scope of things. Is that okay? Great. So, all right. So I found these two source sheets from the American Jewish World Service, which does a fair amount of advocacy in American politics, but mostly for foreign aid. Like they specifically don't do justice stuff in the United States or Israel. They do it in third world countries or developing countries, whatever the current nomenclature is, that otherwise don't get a lot of ongoing attention, particularly from American Jewish groups. But to do a lot of that work that they do abroad, sometimes they do advocacy work for governmental money. So, so I thought these source sheets were interesting. Both of them feel like they're part of a series, but I couldn't find the rest of the series. So we'll fill in the blanks a little bit ourselves as we go. So here's one. A Jewish approach to economic justice. Would someone like to read this Proverbs verse?
I will. One who oppresses the poor blasphemes their maker. One who is gracious to the needy honors God. JPS translation, edited for gender neutrality.
Right, because Hebrew is very gendered language, so even though there's no specific pronoun here, it's all, the verbs are all in the masculine conjunction. Anyway,
it's an ancient language.
It's an ancient language, right? And as we saw yesterday, there are attempts to make it gender neutral, and then it doesn't flow off the tongue as well. Okay, so what does this mean? How is oppressing the poor a blaspheme to God?
Well, we are all equal in God's eye, and also we should be caring for each other no matter what. So that flies in the face of.
Right.
Also,
okay.
aren't we made in God's image?
Yes.
So if we're don't take care of the poor, we're also not taking care of God.
Right. I've heard that the God's image piece used both ways for why we should do acts of justice, that both like by not caring for the poor, we're not honoring their image of God, like that they are also, and we're not honoring our own, because if God interfered directly in human lives, God would take care of the poor. And so, but like it's our job as the human hands of God to do it instead. And if we don't, then we're not living up to our divine spark either. So yeah, I like that. Any other thoughts on how it's a blasphemy? Or the reverse, how is or why is God honored by those who are gracious to the needy?
There's lots of quotes we could take from the Torah if we had the knowledge to do that, that talk about this very thing.
Right. Okay.
You
Because the Torah tells us
you
so.
could even take the Ten Commandments, and several of them could be interpreted in this way.
Right.
I think that compared to God, we are the poor and beggars, and that when that we need to communicate to the divine how we wish to be treated as small and significant beings by loving and sharing with those who have nothing, that perhaps God will bless us as well.
Yeah, I like that.
That whole series of not putting stumbling blocks before the blind.
Right. Yeah.
That one, and taking care of the widow, and not taking the baby bird out of its nest, and that kind of stuff.
Hang on a second. Simcha is texting me that they're here at the building.
What?
They're here at the building.
Oh, the door must be locked.
I
God,
appreciate
that people should want to be in person. That's just incomprehensible.
I appreciate all of your informed responses. I just know we need to take care of others.
Okay. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, Terry, or somebody, it sounded like you were saying something insightful when I walked in, but I missed what it was.
It was me, but it was truly not insightful.
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Okay.
So I said that I appreciated everyone's informed responses. I just know it's what we have to do.
Right. Because we're Jews and we just know. How about what is the relationship between our actions and God, and why is it important?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, okay, so AJWS is not a reform organization, but obviously as a progressive organization, I think we can read some reform theology into it, which is that our actions manifest the divine spirit we want to have on earth, right? Like Reform Judaism does not believe that ritual commandments, that performing specified rituals necessarily is going to make the world better. It's doing the work to make the world better that makes the world better. We're not bringing a divine Messiah to come save us when we light Shabbat candles. We're bringing about our own messianic age when we care for the poor, the widow, the orphan, blah, blah, blah.
Good answer, Rabbi. Thank you.
Blah, blah, blah. So it comes back a little bit to everything we've already said, right? That we're honoring the divine spark, that we are hoping that by being gracious to those less fortunate than us, we're hoping that God will be gracious to us. That we just know from all of our other commandments that this is what we're supposed to do. So there's that. Okay. Mishnah Torah. So Mishnah Torah is the book of law that that Maimonides, the Rambam, wrote, where he kind of condensed all of the arguments in the Talmud and mixed with his own, like, what was happening in his community, you know. So there's a lot of arguments in the Talmud that are kind of unfinished, and he sort of finished them based on which practice stuck, right? Like if a halacha isn't fully decided on in the Talmud itself, but one of those opinions ended up being the ritual for the next 300 years or whatever until Maimonides wrote the Mishnah Torah, then he reasoned, then that's the halacha, right? So he condenses all of that into this. I think it's 5 volumes. It might be 6, but more than a book, but much smaller than the Talmud. And it's still one of the most definitive books of Jewish law to this day. And he writes a lot about tzedakah. I would say, in my experience, I've not read the whole Mishnah Torah, and I have not read the whole Shulchan Aruch, which is the other most definitive book of Jewish law that came a few hundred years later, by Joseph Caro. But from what I have read and from what I've seen, just like in pull quotes on the topics at hand, Maimonides writes more about tzedakah, and Caro writes more about, I think, what we would consider more the topic of today, about like paying your workers on time, not holding debts over people. Like it's less about charity, as it were, and more about like fair business practices and like not exploiting people with money. Which is an interesting split. And I'm sure they both have writings on each of them, but that's been sort of what I have found in my, single semester studies of each of those books. And then also just what I find in source sheets, like what comes up. But anyway, so who would like to read this quote from the Mishnah Torah from Maimonides?
If a poor man requests money from you and you have nothing to give him, speak to him consolingly. It is forbidden to upbraid a poor person or to shout at him because his heart is broken and contrite. For it is written in Isaiah, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite.
Thank you. So what does this text teach us about the way we are supposed to treat the poor?
With dignity,
And respect.
Yeah.
As equals.
And understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say it's integrity. Yeah. It's
Yep.
something that I have found I struggle with more than I would like to admit. Not to like see the dignity in people, but like when I don't have cash on me, or I can't give to the person on the street or on the median, especially it's easy in the median to just avert your eyes. Not that I would ever upbraid or shout at someone for asking for money, but I have heard from homeless people in some of my work with the Religious Action Center and other things like that, where they've brought in some of the organizers for homeless communities in DC, and they'll say, like, really, yes, like we need money, we need to have food during the day, but we also just want to feel like people. And like
Yes.
if you can just like look us in the eye and say, how are you, then that goes a long way. And I hear that, and also I find myself really uncomfortable if I can't help them and do what they're asking, to still like be friendly. I don't know, there's something about it that feels very forced to me, and it's something I still struggle with personally, that I know I'm supposed to do more of and do better at. But it's so much easier to just avert my eyes.
I think I mean, fear is part of my reaction. It's safer to avert my eyes, for something like, it depends. If we're on the curb, I can just go by without, what am I going to do? Open my window and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you.
Right.
If, but if somebody approaches me on the street, I either say, I'm sorry, I can't, and walk on quickly, or shake my head no. But I can't see myself saying, I'm sorry, how are you? I don't want to start a conversation, but I also want to recognize them. So
I have worked at hypothermia shelter and had opportunity to really talk with people without homes. And I think everything you're saying is spot on. People on the median, there's been enough reports that they may not necessarily be homeless and without,
Right.
but using it as a way. But because of everything that's been said, I do greet them. I don't roll my window down, but I look for eye contact. I smile. But I also am not so sure it's a good way to, I don't necessarily want to reinforce that as a means of getting money. There was one story, I was at a gas station and somebody approached me and asked if I had a few dollars, and I really didn't. And I said I didn't, and got back in my car, and I forgot to close the cap to the gas tank. And they came over and told me, and I told them I really didn't have money, but I had change in my wallet, and I gave that to them. But so many aspects of this.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
complicated.
I have a couple thoughts. One, there are organizations where, people go out every day, the same place, they have the same corner or spot on the median, and in the end they bring back and they pool the money to some church or other organization, not sure where it goes. That makes me a little uncomfortable. What I've done sometimes is because I'm diabetic, I usually carry extra food or, crackers or whatever in the car. So I roll down my window and like, this is what I got, and it's not much or exactly what they're looking for, but it's something. When I was years ago, when I lived in New Jersey and worked in my father's office in Newark, every day to get to the office, I would have to walk past the courthouse where in the morning there would be essentially drunks who lived on the courthouse steps and did quite well because, lawyers were coming and going and they would give them cash, but they would turn around and use that cash for alcohol. And when it got really too cold or they became unconscious, then they were taken to the hospital or to a shelter where they wouldn't stay very long. And that just brings up a whole plethora of other issues of, are you enabling, when you're giving the cash when they're just using it for alcohol or now for drugs, anyhow.
but this
Yeah.
is not asking about giving. This is asking about how you treat the
Right.
person, that whether you give it to them or not.
Right. It's specifically talking about when you can't give it to them for whatever reason. Like there's someone who hangs out at the Sheets where I usually stop on my way. It's like right off 95 on my way here to and from. And the first time she asked for money for like, oh, our car broke down, or like we ran out of gas, we're trying to get home to North Carolina or whatever, blah blah blah. And I didn't have cash, but I said, okay, pull it up to the pump behind me and I'll just, I'll buy you a tank of gas. And now, but now I've seen the same person there
Yeah.
many times over the course of weeks. So like clearly they're not going home to North Carolina. But they are always wearing the same like pajamas. And like to Sim's point, like if they're asking for this money, like the story is a lie, obviously, but they still need something. And it's hard for me to balance like my own reaction to that. Like I can't buy them a tank of gas every week.
Mhm.
That's crazy. But especially now when a tank of gas is $50. But like I don't know how I react when I see them coming, like run in my car real quick so they don't ask me again. Because I'm sure they ask the same, like they ask so many people in a week, they don't remember me.
You know, I think that it seems, listening to everyone, the bottom line, I feel that's causing such angst for us is,
Yeah,
do
that
we
we want to
really
help.
do we really want to? We feel we should, but
Yeah,
do we really want to?
right. So it's a lot of personal feelings we've discussed. What are the justice themes that emerge from this text, do you think? The more maybe more systemic issues we can call upon.
Well, the question that we had before about how forget how we treating the poor as we all agreed that we should treat the poor as equals and with respect and all the other adverbs that we use,
Right.
whatever. But
Qualifiers.
yes, thank you. I have to go back and parse. But so I guess that would, I mean, we all agreed that we need to treat the poor equally, but then when it comes to the physical giving of money, which we haven't really gotten to that question yet, but all of a sudden that changes for a variety of reasons, that and some of them are social justice still, but
Right.
anyway.
I would venture to say that part of the problem, right, is that we do live in a society that dehumanizes the poor and
Mm-hmm.
criminalizes
Mm-hmm.
homelessness and things like that, such that it does feel potentially dangerous. It does feel transgressive to like strike up a conversation, to try to just sit and talk with a stranger that you can't, who's asking for help that you can't give. um and that we like the invisibility of poverty is so encouraged, that's partly what we're talking about, that like we know we're supposed to fight against that, but it's so ingrained. And how do we do that?
It was I watched the movie Little Women and the new one, and that reminded me of the story. And the family goes and gives their whole Christmas breakfast to the poor woman and her children living down the block. That kind of charity would be easy to do because these people and that they're needy, and you know that they can't, that they're not doing this to trick you, and they're not doing this because
Right.
they're high on drugs, and they're not there. But the stranger on the street, you don't know the story, and you can't know the story. And maybe that's another question that the Talmud needs to deal with. If you don't know the story, how do you follow social justice if you don't know the story?
Right.
So
That's a fair.
So are we asking ourselves, do we need to know the story to do the right thing, or should we just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do?
But
Is
then
it the right thing if you're supporting something that's not necessarily helpful?
So, not that I'm always good at this, but the way I try to think of it is, I don't know their story. So at the moment, that is their job. That,
Mhm.
that is what they are doing to try to earn a living.
Right.
And who are we to say that's less
That's a
Um,
good point.
well
That
than
is,
our job?
that's what makes all of this so complicated, Nancy.
And if what they need at that moment is a fix, whether it be alcohol or whatever else, then shouldn't we provide for them what they need at that moment?
No,
Even again, if in the long run, it's not in their best interest.
no. Can't agree with that one, but everything else, yes.
it sounds right, but I can't make myself believe it.
I think this is why I don't like giving to individuals who are asking. I
Right,
am
right.
happy to give money to organizations. I'm iffy about the Salvation Army because I know they're a mission, but I know that they're really doing good things and they really are helping. So I don't.
If it makes you feel any better, Juliet, Rabbi Katz, who was our rabbi for, I don't know, 10 years or so, was working for the Salvation Army. So
No kidding.
But I know there are organizations like Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and their office is right in that building next to the McDonald's that's at Dale and Mooneyville. And a lot of times people will be begging in the Safeway parking lot, and they will come up to me and have this whole story. And I feel that just giving people begging in the Safeway parking lot money does not feel right. But I do not hesitate to say, if you go across the street, there's Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and they can help you more than I can. And I feel like if they are really a person in need, they can go do that. And if they're just hustling bucks because it's easy and they're not too prideful to do it, then they won't. So I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's a lot of times what I end up doing.
I
Well,
don't think that,
that's in theme with what the Mishnah Torah is saying here. I mean, I don't know if you say it in a consoling way, but that you are offering more systemic long-term help by
right.
directing them to services.
The
I think,
problem that often exists with people that are poor and need money and are asking for it on the street is they don't have a job or housing necessarily because they have severe mental health issues and they won't accept help. They won't or can't stay in a shelter. They won't or can't maintain a job because they won't stay on their medication or get treatment, and that runs the vicious circle. Or they won't go to an agency for help, or they insist on living in the woods, or whatever their issue may be. So it's such a convoluted
Yeah.
problem all the way around, and then and I think that brings up different feelings from different people, and as emotionally and intellectually and so forth.
I think one of the answers I saw was back when I was young in the Navy and I was outside of Chicago. I used to go into Chicago a lot. And one day there was a mission there that had a small part for sailors, that you could stay overnight and they'd give you breakfast in the morning. But the main part was a mission to all the people on the streets there. And it seemed like there were drunks all over the place in downtown Chicago then. But I remember walking up, the minister was standing outside, and I was walking up to say hi to him, and I almost fell over a drunk in the sidewalk. And I said, there's a guy over there. Aren't you going to go get him? And he said, no, he knows where we are. And if he'll come over here, we'll take him in. And, they put them to work, things around the mission and stuff, but they give them job training so that hopefully they could leave and be self-sufficient members of society. But, he was a minister, but he had a pretty tough attitude about people. Will help you if you're willing to accept it. And some of these people weren't. And I think that's what keeps some social workers sane, because they're trying to help these people. The people disappoint them. And next thing they know, they're not in the social work anymore. And I think people who have a kind of a strong attitude and say, yes, but we're going to help you get out of your situation, but you've got to accept our help.
Boundaries are very important.
I don't know what you do. I don't know what anyone can do for the folks that Michelle Young was talking about. I mean, some things, maybe there aren't answers for some things, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, I am so grateful every day that I don't have personal people in my family that I need to deal with like that. And that's one of the hardest things I can imagine, having people like that to try to help. I don't know what you do.
It just occurred to me, we're all focusing on giving money. Maybe money isn't always the answer to the problem. Maybe, we can help the poor by, different offering services, food, shelter, whatever else we could. Maybe, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, and Juliet's talking about organizations that we give to that do.
Right.
I mean, we can't open the synagogue doors to homeless people.
No, but we collect food and, bring it to the shelter or the food bank and that sort of thing.
Right, we do that kind of thing.
It's amazing how incredibly complex this is, and how such a short little question can bring up so much.
Yes, indeed. We could talk about this forever, but we're gonna move
Yes.
on.
We could.
So one last thing I'll say, just to segue us to the next text, which is a very different topic, is I think, yes, that the point of this text is to say sometimes money isn't the only answer, at least. It might be an answer, but Maimonides also says the greatest form of tzedakah is to help a person become self-sufficient, so they don't need to ask anymore. And that the bigger, systemic issues we're talking about, of like that there aren't enough services to support people, to catch mental illness early enough before they end up homeless and then get even crazier and whatever. Like, there tends to be a cycle there between mental illness and poverty, where it's a little hard sometimes to tell which came first, the chicken or the egg. And it can be generational and all of those things. And so part of how we might be able to start, rather than just giving money to people on the street, is in how we conduct our business practices and how we expect companies that we pay for goods from to treat their employees. If I think most of us on this call are not ourselves business owners. So whatever, but we can still demand that our consumerism goes to people who do have fair business practices and doesn't exploit their workers to the point where then they have to act in extreme ways to make the difference up.
I think if we do that right now, Rabbi, we're all going to have to start walking.
That's true. It's very difficult. And so I go through phases where I'm like, I just like can't I can't participate in this boycott or whatever because, like, who am I going to go to instead? You think, like when there was a Nabisco or whatever strike, like, you think General Mills is better, or like you think Kraft is better? Like, those workers weren't on strike yet, so there wasn't a solidarity boycott of their goods, but like, for sure, a similar level of exploitation is happening. And so it gets overwhelming.
Mhm.
And and yes, with the walking, I assume you're talking about like oil companies and our car.
Yeah, I'm talking about the auto strike.
Yeah. um that there's and just there are some big picture issues with that too, not just with our workers, of course, but with climate justice and how
Mhm.
our dependency on cars. Anyway, but where we can, it's it's good to put our money where our mouth is, or where our values are. So who would like to read this section from Bava Metzia? This is the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud.
I can do it. Some
Thank you.
porters working for Rabba Bar Hanan broke a jug of wine. He seized their clothes. They came before Rob, and Rob said to Rabba Bar Hanan, "Give them their clothing." Rabba Bar Hanan said to him, "Is this the law?" Rob said, "Yes, because of the principle. You should walk in the ways of the good." Proverbs 2:20. He gave them back their clothes. They said to him, "We are poor, and we troubled ourselves to work all day, and we are needy. Do we receive nothing?" Immediately Rob said to Rabba Bar Hanan, "Give them their wages." And he said to Rob, "Is this the law?" Rob said, "Yes, you should keep the ways of the righteous." Proverbs 2:20. And Jill Jacobs translation.
Just for context, Jill Jacobs is the founder, I think founder, anyway, CEO of TRUA, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. So
Oh, okay.
she has a vested interest in translating with a bend for justice. So what does this all mean? This deal with their clothing and how, which one is which? How Rabba Bar Hanan treats his workers.
Well, he doesn't even pay them. And then, they do something where he feels he's wronged, and then he punishes them. So like he's doing it two wrongs, and it's not, I'm wondering, not even if we're worrying about the law, but morally, it's just wrong all the way around.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I assume he thought he took the clothes as payment for the jug of wine, but he obviously doesn't treat them as you should treat your workers anyway. But yeah, the question, he only is doing it because it's the law. I guess that's better than nothing. But one would hope that you would recognize, without the written law, without having to go to a rabbi and say, should I pay these guys? You should, you should feel that that's what you should do. But I guess some people don't. That's all.
Well, that's not our society. If there wasn't a minimum wage, people,
Right.
and even with minimum wage, people are still living below the poverty line, or having to work two jobs to make ends meet.
Or
Uh,
three.
So
Right, this is realistic.
yeah.
Yeah, the currency is a little different, but the problem is the same, right? That
Mhm.
Rabba Bar Hana is wealthy enough that he can afford porters, right? He can afford help around his home.
Mhm.
He has extraneous jugs of wine. And meanwhile, his workers are now naked and hungry for their day's worth of labor has not been compensated, and in fact has been punished. So not great. Why do you think he asks is this the law? And what does Rav's answer mean? But like, how are the two answers different?
One is, I don't know the words, but more in the real world, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
And the other is more of a moral decision.
Yeah. Okay. Which is which?
Have to give them their wages is the law, I would say.
I see. Okay.
Well, I mean, both of one is you should walk in the way of the good, and the other is you should keep the ways of the righteous.
Right.
They sound equivalent to me. And it's the law, but I mean, we're not used to the law being written like that. It sounds more like an ethical quote than a law, but it's the way that it's written. So,
Right.
but I don't see a difference between the two.
Yeah.
Maybe one's a higher level than the other.
Perhaps. It's interesting they come from the same verse in Proverbs. So it's not like he's quote like they clearly are meant to be in relationship with each other in their original context as well. I think it's interesting that Rabba Barbarhana, the first time he asks, "This is the law," and Rob says yes because of this proverb, which again, like, doesn't feel super legally binding, but just like this is the morality, so this is the law. And but then he asks again, what do you think Rabba Barbar Hanan is looking for when he asks, is this the law? Because he asks a second time after the first answer, it doesn't feel very legally binding. So what is he, why does he accept these answers? I guess is really my question.
Maybe he was hoping for a different answer with the second question, but
Maybe.
maybe in his small society, he's asking to begin with. So maybe he's afraid to what his community's opinion might be of him if he doesn't do it. It doesn't seem like oh yeah, this is the right thing to do. It doesn't sound like the kind of guy that would say that, but maybe he would be the kind of guy that he wouldn't want other people to think less of him or something.
Right. Shame can be a powerful motivator.
Very much so.
Being good and righteous are two different things.
Okay.
You can be righteous and not be good. So I think when he's talking about the wages, he's saying, this is what you have to do. It's the law. No one's going to work for you if you don't pay people for work. But when he's talking about, in the first one, he's talking about punishing people for something that was an accident. Good people do not punish people for accidents. But in the second one, it's no, you don't make people work and then refuse to pay them. You got to pay people, which is a whole different arena.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. That's
You know,
helpful.
today, if somebody works in a store and their cash register comes up short, is it, I think I've heard that they have to pay the difference, or am I just
I've
imagining that?
heard that. I don't know. I don't have experience, but I have heard that as well.
Yeah, I
I
don't either.
suspect it's the policy of, the individual policy of the store. I mean, that's not a law, but
No.
the store
But the
might.
fact that it is legal for the stores to do that to their employees, maybe is the point Terry's driving at.
I think they can, from what I hear, but I don't know if they do.
I guess what we're reading is from such a long time ago, but I think where I was going is it still happens.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And in rereading this, I see that the answers are both, yes, this is the law.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you, so, when he gives them back their clothes and they ask still for their day's wages, they say we are poor and we are needy. Do you think Rabba Bar Barhana would be less obligated to give them their day's wages if they were not poor and needy, if they were middle class workers or whatever the equivalent in ancient Babylonia would have been?
They're both entitled.
It's a contract. I'm working for you, you're paying me. It's a contract that needs to be fulfilled.
I just want to, this discussion this morning just makes me realize how complex all of our decisions are about what we tolerate, what we accept, what we do, all the levels of judgment. And it is judgment.
It is judgment. Okay, we're coming up on running out of time. I'm trying to think, where should we go next? I think this next one, you shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the strangers who are in your land inside your gates. At this day you shall give him his wages, nor shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor and his life depends on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and it be a sin for you. So I think it's interesting, again, this question comes back to, like, it's specifying the poor and the needy. You shall not exploit them for the fact that they are poor and needy. I do think it is possible to read into this that it is okay to take advantage of your salaried workers, or, like, you know, that they aren't depending, they're not living paycheck to paycheck the same way. So whatever. However, I would, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Debbie. You want to enter?
I was just going to say another way to read it, though, might be not that you are less obligated to pay a white collar worker in today's language, but a white collar worker, maybe Deuteronomy is assuming, can take care of himself. He'll know how to go to the boss and get his rightful wage, whereas a poor needy person, just because of the structure of society, needs the force of law behind him because he doesn't know or can't defend himself. Maybe that's why it specifies poor and needy.
That is a great point. And
But isn't that judgmental?
Oh, I agree, but I'm just trying to defend what's in front of me.
well, but I don't think it's also, I also don't think it's wrong. Like, yeah, sure, it's judgmental, it's presumptive that a white collar worker, but we are talking about how money influences power. So a white collar worker does have more power
Oh,
to go to their boss.
they do.
And this is why unions are important for particularly for blue collar jobs, because the people in those jobs have less institutional power, and it is harder, and not, maybe there's an education difference that they might not know how to go about getting their fair wage, but more likely they might not feel empowered to do so, or they might risk
Mhm.
being fired if they do so.
But there's
True.
power in
And-
numbers. There's gonna be more
Yeah,
needy workers than there are upper management or whatever. So
if they
when
band
the
together.
and the reasons for unions is when those poor downtrodden workers come together, they bring they upgrade their power.
Yes.
I think it's important, and I don't think anyone here does this intentionally, but I think it's so important to not inadvertently, I don't know how to say this, judge the poor, but everything that you were saying, Rabbi, about overall, if you don't have the resources and you may feel less power. So I didn't say that very well, but I think it's important to me to not see poor as less than as an individual.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I
But
think
when
there's
we're-
another element here in that if you're poor and needy, you kind of are stuck between two things. You work a terrible job or you beg. And we want to encourage people to work their way out of the hole, that by saying, okay, it may not be the best work, but I want you to keep getting better and to keep believing in yourself, and I will keep believing in you, and one day you won't be poor. And that is respectful, and that is social justice, I think. More than just saying, okay, you're a crappy person, you do crappy work, and I may pay you or I may not.
Yes, I hope a boss does not say that to their workers. Even if they do poor work, there's other ways to encourage them to improve. The other thing I was gonna say about how it specifies, you shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, is that like I think this was in our Yom Kippur talk a little bit about tzedakah, that like you don't always know who's poor and needy, or like what a person's like standard of living has been, and you know that there was something in there about in the tzedakah study about like maintaining a certain comfort of what you have been used to living at, even when you're no longer fully able to support that on your own. I mean, within reason, but like someone who has owned their house and maybe is now like, you know, in a difficult situation financially, they shouldn't just be kicked out of their home abruptly by the, you know, by a bank foreclosure. Like there are level, you know. And so and that you wouldn't want to cause someone to become poor and needy because you overexploited their white collar labor, or the, you know, their middle class labor. So um that like that yes, everybody deserves to be paid a fair wage for the amount of work that they do, commensurate with like, you know, also the preparatory work that goes into the jobs, their the danger level. Like there's a lot of considerations that should go into how jobs are paid, but that and I don't think like how society values those jobs should be one of the considerations, because I think society is foolish about what it thinks are valuable jobs. Everyone wants to be able to go to a restaurant, but then looks down at the people who serve you and like, what, how do you think you would go to the restaurant if somebody didn't have that job? or mechanics, trash pickup people, these jobs that people think are like dirty, but like our society would be disgusting if somebody didn't do those jobs. So,
Absolutely. I just want you all to know that I now have a headache after struggling with this. This is hard.
It is hard.
Well, look forward to menopause, Terry. That'll help you.
I've already been through that. Thank you.
No, I meant
I know. You're talking about the play.
yes, ma'am.
The Sisterhood ladies are going to see Menopause the musical, right? It's a musical.
Yeah.
This afternoon. Okay, so we are out of time. Just to quickly say, this other source sheet that I put, it is on the website. You can look at it yourself. This is another one. It says election issues 1, taxes. So I thought there might be, elections issues 2. Couldn't find anything else on the AJWS site. But so some of this is about so taxes again is something we were talking about at the tzedakah conversation on Yom Kippur, because the way that Jewish communities historically collected tzedakah and then redistributed it was like a tax system within their community. But it does also get to a bit about oh no, this isn't the one. Okay, somewhere I found one that also has a Heather Richardson Cox. Did I get her name right this time? Okay, Heather Cox Richardson, something like that. She had a essay on money in campaigns and how so it's less about taxes, but it's an election issue of how certain that wealthier people are already at a higher advantage rate for running for office, but then they don't necessarily represent the people that they're representing, and issues with that. And it must be a couple years old because it talks specifically about the Georgia recounts and stuff from, was that 2018 when Warnock and no, okay, anyway,
2020.
2020
Warnock and Herschel Walker.
guy. Yeah. So it was anyway, so it talked about that, and it was also very interesting. And other things to keep in mind, it's just how money plays into systemic injustices in our community, and how they sometimes feel like the barriers for those of us who are comfortable but not wealthy, what is our responsibility to help the people who are less fortunate than us, but we are still constricted, and really it should be higher ups, and all of that kind of balance is at question here. So next time we'll talk more about how Jewish communities have specifically organized and advocated around these issues in American politics. Enjoy the musical, ladies that are going to that.
Thank you, and everyone have a very good week.
Thank you. You too. Be safe.
Thank you, Rabbi.